All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep, and I mean deep, into a medical mystery that's equal parts fascinating and unsettling. We're talking about encephalitis lethargica. You probably know it better as sleeping sickness, but this one goes way beyond just feeling a little sleepy.
It really does. It's a perfect topic for a deep dive, actually. You know, researchers have had to really dig deep themselves, going through historical records and all kinds of scientific studies, just to kind of wrap their heads around what they were dealing with.
And speaking of digging deep, you've given us this incredible mix of sources to work with for this one. We've got medical journals, historical accounts, even a transcript from a popular science podcast. It's amazing how they all paint this picture, though, of a disease that kind of just appeared out of nowhere and then poof, gone.
It almost makes you wonder if it even happened. But the evidence is there. Millions of people were affected in this pandemic, starting in the early 1900s. It really peaked around 1923.
So that's right around the same time as the Spanish flu pandemic, too. It's fascinating to me, though. You know, we hear so much about the devastating impact of the flu, but encephalitis lethargica, which was directly responsible for over 500,000 deaths.
Well, it's almost a footnote in history.
It's like it got overshadowed by the Spanish flu, even though if you look at the symptoms, it caused its own set of, well, terrifying problems.
And speaking of symptoms, let's get into those. You've got fever, headaches, lethargy. These are all pretty common, right? But then things take a turn for the truly bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
With neurological and psychiatric symptoms that are, well, hard to even imagine.
Yeah, some patients had double vision, they had really slow thinking, trouble moving. But I think the most striking, the most unsettling symptom was this thing where people just got frozen, stuck in place.
Wow.
Just imagine being fully conscious but completely unable to move or speak.
Oh, that's terrifying. Like being trapped inside your own body, totally aware of everything going on around you, but unable to interact with anything or anyone. It's giving me chills just thinking about it. What could possibly cause such a specific and debilitating effect?
That's the million-dollar question. It's haunted researchers for over a century now. And to add to the mystery, not everyone who got encephalitis lethargica actually died. Sadly, about a third did, often from respiratory failure. But for the survivors, only a small fraction ever really recovered. Many were left with long-term problems, neurological and psychiatric effects that lingered for years, sometimes decades, after the initial infection.
That's what I find so disturbing about this disease. It's not just the immediate impact, it's the long shadow it casts over the lives of the people who survived. Some develop this thing called post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, which has similar symptoms to Parkinson's disease, but it progresses in a different way. And then there are those who experience huge behavioral changes, sometimes years after they seem to have recovered. Some became almost apathetic, like they had zero initiative, while others had much more dramatic changes, resembling symptoms of schizophrenia, and in children, even ADHD.
So we have this disease, it strikes seemingly out of nowhere, causes all sorts of bizarre and debilitating symptoms, and then for many, leaves behind this legacy of long-term neurological and psychological problems. It's no wonder it's considered such a medical enigma. But where do we even begin to try and unravel this mystery?
Well, I think it's important to start with what we don't know, and that's the cause. Despite decades of research, we still don't have a clear answer as to what caused encephalitis lethargica.
So we're left with this giant question mark hanging over the whole thing. But there have to be some theories out there, right? Some leads that researchers have followed trying to find a cause.
Oh, absolutely. Early on, there was a lot of focus on a possible connection to the influenza virus, given that it was happening at the same time as the pandemic. But so far, there's no really solid evidence to support that.
Okay, so if not the flu, then what else are researchers considering?
Well, one of the more recent areas of focus is the idea of an autoimmune response. This is where your body's own immune system basically attacks healthy cells and tissues.
And what would trigger something like that?
Some researchers believe that a specific strain of Streptococcus bacteria could be involved. There's some evidence suggesting that getting infected with this bacteria could sometimes lead to a whole chain reaction, and that ends up with the immune system attacking the brain, leading to the inflammation that's a key part of encephalitis.
So it's not the bacteria itself directly causing the damage, but the body's reaction to it.
Exactly. It's like friendly fire gone wrong. And this autoimmune theory could help explain why the symptoms of encephalitis lethargica were so varied, and why they often showed up weeks or even months after the initial infection.
Like a delayed reaction, the immune system slowly turning against the brain. It also makes me think about the different types of encephalitis lethargica described in our sources. There was the amniostatic akinetic form, the hyperkinetic form, and the somnolent ophthalmoplegic type.
Ah, yes, the three faces of this mysterious illness, each with its own unique set of scary symptoms.
And each challenging our understanding of the brain and how disease can affect it. So let's break these down a little. First, we have the amniostatic akinetic form.
In this one, people experience this prolonged rigidity, almost like a statue. Imagine being totally aware of what's going on around you, but you're trapped, unable to move a muscle.
Okay, that's terrifying. Then there's the hyperkinetic form, which sounds equally unsettling.
Instead of rigidity, here you see involuntary movements, often jerky and uncontrolled. Some patients even had these vocalizations. Imagine compulsive screaming or other strange noises.
I can't even imagine how distressing that would be for both the person experiencing it and for those around them. But it seems like the most common form was the somnolent ophthalmoplegic type.
Yes, this one often started with confusion, delirium, and an overwhelming urge to sleep, hence the nickname sleeping sickness. It was this form that frequently led to those long-term neurological and psychiatric effects we talked about earlier.
So 3 different ways the disease could show up, each with its own set of frightening symptoms. But do we know why there was such variation? Like, why would one person develop rigidity while another experiences uncontrolled movements?
Well, that's another piece of the puzzle we're still working on. It's possible that the different forms reflect different ways the immune system was attacking the brain, or maybe slight variations in the areas of the brain being affected.
Okay, so we've talked about the autoimmune theory, but weren't there some other possible causes mentioned in our sources?
Yes, some research suggests that a specific type of enterovirus, possibly even the poliovirus, might be linked to some cases of encephalitis lethargica.
That's an interesting connection. Polio, like encephalitis lethargica, also affects the nervous system, although it usually causes paralysis, not these strange movement disorders or the frozen state.
It's a complicated picture, and we may never have a single definitive answer. It's possible that encephalitis lethargica wasn't caused by one specific thing, but by a combination of factors, maybe a viral infection followed by an autoimmune response, or even a genetic predisposition that made some people more vulnerable.
Right, it reminds us that the human body is incredibly complex, and the interactions between our genes, the environment, and these infectious agents can lead to all sorts of unpredictable outcomes. And speaking of unpredictable outcomes, let's talk about Oliver Sacks. He famously treated some catatonic encephalitis lethargica survivors in the 1960s. Using L-dopa, which is a drug normally used to treat Parkinson's disease. What can we learn about this mysterious illness from his work?
Sacks's work is a fascinating chapter in the story of encephalitis lethargica. His book, Awakenings, describes the experiences of his patients, people who had been trapped in a catatonic state for decades. And then, when treated with L-dopa, experienced this temporary but profound awakening.
It's hard to believe that these individuals, who seemed completely lost to the world, were able to communicate, move, and interact with their families again, even if it was just for a short time.
And it's not just the human impact of his work that's significant. The fact that L-dopa had any effect at all gives us valuable clues about how encephalitis lethargica might work.
How so?
Well, L-dopa works by increasing dopamine levels in the brain. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, basically a chemical messenger that's involved in all kinds of functions, including movement, mood, and motivation. The fact that L-dopa was able to temporarily awaken these patients suggests that encephalitis lethargica might have disrupted dopamine pathways in the brain.
So it's possible that the virus, or the autoimmune response, was targeting areas of the brain that are rich in dopamine, and that led to those severe movement disorders and changes in behavior.
That's one possibility. And while the awakenings were sadly short-lived, Sacks's work does highlight the incredible plasticity of the brain, its ability to adapt and possibly recover even after decades of damage. It's a glimmer of hope in an otherwise pretty dark and mysterious story.
It's amazing to think that even after such severe neurological damage, the brain can still change and potentially recover. But it also makes you wonder, if encephalitis lethargica were to reemerge today, would we be any better at dealing with it than we were a century ago?
That's a question a lot of researchers have been thinking about lately. And it's not just a hypothetical concern. While large-scale outbreaks are unlikely, there have been a few isolated cases reported, which suggests that encephalitis lethargica hasn't completely disappeared.
Hold on, so you're saying people are still getting this disease today? That's a little unnerving.
There was a case a few years ago that really got everyone's attention. A 12-year-old girl started showing symptoms very similar to those described during the pandemic, including that terrifying frozen state. It was a stark reminder that this disease, which we thought was a thing of the past, can still show up today.
Wow, this is getting more and more intriguing. And didn't one of the virologists who studied encephalitis lethargica even predict that it would return?
You're right, he did. And his research, along with that of others, suggests that whatever caused the pandemic could absolutely happen again. He pointed to a severe immune reaction to a streptococcus-like bacteria as the potential culprit, which lines up with what we've been discussing about the autoimmune theory.
So it's not just some historical curiosity, it's a potential threat we need to be aware of and ready for. But how do you prepare for a disease we still don't fully understand?
That's the challenge, isn't it? We need to invest in research, both to unlock the remaining secrets of encephalitis lethargica and to develop better ways to diagnose and treat it. We also need to make sure healthcare professionals are aware of it, so they can recognize the symptoms and intervene early.
It seems like history is trying to teach us something here, reminding us that we're still vulnerable to the unexpected, and that new diseases can pop up at any time.
Absolutely. And it's not just about being prepared for the return of encephalitis lethargica. This case is a cautionary tale. It reminds us to be vigilant about all emerging infectious diseases and the possibility of long-term serological effects.
It's like a wake-up call, telling us to strengthen our public health systems and put resources into scientific research, so we're better equipped to handle whatever challenges come our way. And speaking of challenges, there's another interesting parallel here that we should talk about. The emergence of long COVID, and how it seems to mirror, in some ways, the long-term neurological and psychiatric effects of encephalitis lethargica.
Ah, yes, the echoes of history. While long COVID and encephalitis lethargica are different illnesses, they both show how viral infections can have a profound and lasting impact on the brain and body, with effects that can stick around for months or even years.
It's like encephalitis lethargica is giving us a glimpse into the possible long-term consequences of viral infections, reminding us that the road to recovery can be long, uncertain, and full of twists and turns.
And that we're still figuring out the complex relationships between viruses, the immune system, and the human brain. Just like with encephalitis lethargica, we're seeing a wide variety of lingering symptoms in some people with long COVID. Fatigue, brain fog, trouble concentrating, even mood changes.
So it's not just about surviving the initial infection, it's about understanding and addressing the potential long-term consequences, which can really affect a person's quality of life.
Exactly, and it's about realizing that we might not even know all the potential long-term effects yet. It's like the shadow of encephalitis lethargica is still hanging over us, reminding us that we need to be watchful, proactive, and above all, compassionate in how we approach these complex and difficult illnesses.
This has been a whirlwind of information. We've gone from living statues and strange neurological symptoms to possible causes, the mysteries of the brain, and the echoes of history in long COVID. It seems like every time we peel back a layer of this medical enigma, we find even more questions. But before we get into the final part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more point that really caught my attention. Do you remember how encephalitis lethargica just seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared? Yeah, it's one of the biggest mysteries of this whole thing, like a storm that swept across the world and then, poof, gone.
And this is where that possible connection to the Spanish flu gets even more interesting. Remember how some experts think that the Spanish flu, happening at the same time as the encephalitis lethargica pandemic, might have actually made people more susceptible to encephalitis lethargica?
Yeah, like it weakened everyone somehow, made them more vulnerable to this mysterious sleeping sickness. It's a pretty scary thought.
It is, and it just underscores the fact that we're all connected, not just in terms of human health, but also in this intricate web of interactions within our bodies and with all the microbes around us.
It's like one pandemic set the stage for another. It makes you wonder, could that happen again? Could we have some new virus emerge, wreak havoc, and then leave behind these lingering vulnerabilities that pave the way for another, maybe even more mysterious illness?
It's definitely something we can't rule out. Encephalitis lethargica, even though it seemed to disappear decades ago, teaches us a valuable lesson. We need to be ready, not just for the threats we know about, but for the unexpected, the illnesses we haven't even imagined yet.
So what can we do? How do we prepare for the unknown?
We start by learning from what's already happened, by studying encephalitis lethargica, by digging deeper into its causes and long-term effects. We gain these insights that could help us understand and maybe even treat similar conditions, like long COVID.
It's like studying the past is giving us a guide for dealing with the present and getting ready for the future.
Exactly. We also need to put resources into research, not just on specific diseases, but on those fundamental questions about the brain, the immune system, and how they work together. The more we understand these complex systems, the better we'll be at handling new challenges when they pop up.
So it's not just about finding a cure for encephalitis lethargica, it's about broadening our knowledge of the human body and its weak points, so that we can come up with more effective strategies for preventing and treating all kinds of diseases.
Precisely. And it's about acknowledging that we live in a world where new diseases could show up at any moment. We have to be vigilant, proactive, and ready to adapt as we learn new information.
It's like encephalitis lethargica is this test, a challenge pushing us to be more innovative, more collaborative, and more compassionate in how we approach health and medicine.
It is. And while we may never completely crack the code of encephalitis lethargica, that pursuit of answers, that willingness to face the unknown, is what ultimately drives scientific progress and makes people healthier.
I think that's a powerful message to take away from this whole deep dive. This exploration of a disease that many thought was just a relic of the past has actually given us some profound insights that are incredibly relevant to us today and in the years to come.
It really has. It's highlighted the interconnectedness of human health, the lasting effects of viral infections, and the enduring power of medical mysteries.
And what about those isolated cases we were talking about? Do you think encephalitis lethargica or something similar could come back in a big way?
It's hard to say for sure, but the fact that it's shown up again, even in just a few cases, tells us that it's possible. And that's why continued research and staying alert are so crucial. We can't afford to get complacent.
So, are we ready? Are we prepared for the next encephalitis lethargica, for the next medical mystery that comes out of nowhere?
That's the question we should all be asking. Have we learned from what happened before? Are we investing in the research and the systems we need to respond effectively to new threats?
It's not just a question for scientists and politicians. It's a question for everyone. What can we do to ensure a healthier future for ourselves and for future generations?
We can start by learning about emerging health issues, supporting scientific research, and advocating for policies that prioritize public health and being prepared.
It's like encephalitis lethargica is calling on us to be more proactive, more involved, and more aware of the delicate balance between our health and the world we live in.
It is, and it's a call we can't afford to ignore. Because in a world where new diseases can appear at any moment, knowledge, preparedness, and compassion are our most valuable tools.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. This deep dive into encephalitis lethargica has been fascinating and honestly, at times, a little scary.
It definitely has. We've explored the science, the history, and the human stories behind this truly puzzling disease.
We've gone deep into the mysteries of the brain, the complexities of the immune system, and the potential for long-term consequences from those viral infections.
And I hope you, our listener, have gained a new appreciation for the challenges and the opportunities that are out there in the world of medicine and public health.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought. Encephalitis lethargica, a disease that seemed lost to history, has come back to remind us that the past can teach us about the present, and that the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is the best way to protect ourselves from the unknown.